Hi, today we're going to look at some special adjectives and adverbs, continuing our look at adjectives and adverbs. There is nothing particularly hard about this content. It's mostly just memorizing words and seeing how they're used in sentences. So let's get started. The first category we're going to look at are what are called correlative adverbs and adjectives. So correlative is just a word that means that you have more than one adjective. You have a pair of adjectives or adverbs working as a pair to have a special meaning. The set that we're going to look at are adverbs and adjectives that create a comparison between two parts of the sentence. And usually this comparison deals with quantity or size. So these are words that can be used just on their own as a regular adjective or an adverb, but when they're used together, they have this special meaning, and you're going to see how they work. It's really pretty clear. Now, you have already learned some correlative adverbs, and those are when we use et, for example, not on its own, but et plus et to mean both and. So, et canis et porcus, both the dog and the pig. Or if we use nec, which means neither nor. Nec canis, nec porcus, neither the dog nor the pig. And so in both of those cases, you can see that you're using them to compare two things that are related in some way. They're correlated, and so that's why we call these correlatives. So these are our new forms that when we use them together, they are used as correlatives. And you can see that this group all begins with the letter T, and that their companion all begin with the letter Q. And they're really the same word except for that change. So we have tam and quam, talis qualis, tantus quantus, tot quot, totiens quotiens. You can see that these have forms for masculine, feminine, and neuter. So these are the ones that are adjectives because they'll actually be modifying nouns. And the other ones, tam and tot and totiens, are adverbs. And we'll see how that works out in a minute. But when these are used together, the Q word, right, these always mean as. So you can see tam means so, talis of such a sort, tantus so much or so great, tot so many, totien so often. And you can see that these Q words are really sort of question words that could mean how, or not of such a sort, but what sort, how much, how many, how often. But when they're used in this correlative, tam quam, talis qualis, tantus quantus, all they're going to mean is as. So let's look at some examples so that you can get a sense of how these work. So in these examples, you can see that we've got tam and quam, and tam here is giving us more information about bonus, the adjective. So puer tam bonus est quam poeta. The boy is as good as the poet. So the second quam, this quam is really just that second as, and we're comparing two things, a puer and a poeta. The boy is as good as the poet. You can see the same thing in operation in the next. Casa non talis est qualis villa. A hut is not of such a sort as an estate. So casa and villa are the things that I'm comparing. They're in the same case. Talis, qualis, of such a sort as. The next example does a similar thing. Remember, tantus is one of those words that's an adjective, right? So it is modifying corpus here. Ovis tantum corpus habet quantum capella. A sheep has as big a body as a she-goat. So again, always in the nominative. Capella is the thing being compared. It's also in the nominative. Tantum and quantum are really modifying corpus. They're in the accusative, neuter, right? So, but when you see that tantum and quantum, even though they're in different parts of the sentence, they're not exactly side by side, we translate it as big as or as great as. Here's another example. Tot viri sunt, quod mulieres. There are as many men as women. So tot quote, and then porgos totiens videmos, quotiens agnos. We see pigs as often as lambs. So again, this is an adverb. It's telling us how often. The quotiens just means as. So that's how these work. They are, as long as you know what the word means, when you see them together, it's not tricky. The trickiest thing is that in English, as often as is all side by side, and you can see in Latin that they aren't. You have to sort of read the entire sentence to see that you've got a quote or a quotiens or a quantum and then work it into your sentence. But other than that, it is really, really pretty straightforward. Now, as I said, we do see these nouns or these adjectives and adverbs on their own doing jobs, and they just mean whatever they mean, and that's how we will use them. And we will practice this a whole lot. But you can see something like Tod porcos habeo. I have so many pigs. Tod means so many. Here it's telling us how many pigs he has. Tod porcos. Or ad urbem totiens ambulas. You walk to the city so often. Totiens. The Q words, and Q is sort of a letter that's often used to introduce a question word. And that is true here too. So a lot of these Qs, quantus or qualis or quote, we can use at the beginning of a question to ask how many or how much or how often. So here, quantos is an adjective. It's modifying porcos. Quantos porcos habes? How many pigs do you have? Or qualis vir est? What sort of man is he? So that is really how these work. It is really pretty super straightforward. I don't think this will cause a lot of trouble once we see some of these in action and have a chance to practice. Your chapter also introduces some other kinds of pairs, and these are more like those et, both and. And so we're really going to see these just to separate out two different things, either sentences or clauses or just nouns that we're going to separate. So one way that we can separate things out is by saying not only but also. And Latin has many ways of saying this. So one is cum tum. You've learned cum to mean with. You've learned tum to mean then. In this case, they mean neither of this. Cum means not only, and tum means but also. So you might get confused by this until you see them both together in the sentence, and then you know. So you could say, right, cum pueri, tum puellae, porcos habend. Right? Not only the boys, but also the girls have pigs. Cum pueri tum puellae. We can also express this not only but also idea with this thing, which is honestly a lot more like English. So non, that's the not. Modo, solum, tantum. These are all adverbs that can mean only or just. So not just or not only. So we could say non modo pueri or non tantum pueri. And then our but also starts with the word but and etiam, which can mean also or even. So sed etiam puellae porcos habent. So this is just another formula. You can see it's in the word here can vary because all of these can mean only. So that's pretty straightforward. We also have this way of saying not even, ne quidem, and usually whatever it's not even goes into this, right? So, ne viri quidem agnos habent, right? Not even the men have lambs. So something like that is just, right, this is just usually where that goes. So those are pretty straightforward, I think. We're just going to practice with them and then we'll know them. Our final piece of information in this chapter are irregular adjectives, and to call them irregular is a little bit misleading because for most of their forms they are absolutely regular. So I'm giving you the example of totus, which is an adjective that means all. And it is, as you can see, totus, tota, totum. So just like bonus, bona, bonum, or carus, cara, carum, completely and totally regular, it looks like, except for these 6 forms. In the genitive, for all genders, it's totius. So instead of toti, 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 it's totius, totius, totius. And then in the dative, instead of toto, toti, toto, which is what we would expect, it's toti, toti, toti. But then you can see it is totally and completely regular for the rest of the forms. So it's only these 6 forms that are unusual. So this you might say, oh, this is so confusing. How am I going to know which are the irregular adjectives? Which ones have this strange, unanticipated genitive and dative form? And that, my friends, is so mnemonic device. Our mnemonic is this phrase, unus nauta, one sailor. And there are only, as you can see, 9 adjectives that follow this model. And if we remember unus nauta, one sailor, we can figure them all out. So we've got unus, which means one, nullus, which means no or none or not any, ullus, which means any, or in the plural it can mean some, solus, like solitary, means only or alone. And then we've got these other ones, nuter, nutra, nutrum, which means neither of 2, alter, altera, alterum, the other of 2, uter, utra, utrum, which of 2 or either of 2, and then totus, tota, totum, all, like total, and alius, alia, aliud, which means other or another. So one of the things that you can see is some of these forms, like uter, also begins with a U, and so does ullus. Both of them mean either or any, but the ones that end in ER, you only use when you have an one of 2. So if nullus, if we want to say no people have pigs, we would say nulli homines porcos habent. But if we want to say neither person, neither of 2, we would say neuter homo puercos haben, right? So these forms we only use if we're trying to choose between two people, or we're talking about two alternatives, and the other ones we use for more than two. The same is true of alius versus alter, right? You can see those are similar. Nuter and nullus, and then uter versus ullus. Okay. So those are the forms. The unus nauta forms have ius in the genitive and e in the dative. Otherwise are regular. We use them just like any other adjective to modify nouns. But we do have a couple of special uses. So alius can be used in a pair to mean one and another. It means one or another. So we can say one, another. Alii in the plural would mean some and others. And alter would mean the one, the other, right? Because this is one of these ER forms, so we're talking about two alternatives only. So you can see here I've given you an example, even though I've misspelled it, right? Alius frater, one brother, pecuniam habet, has money. Another brother, nihil, has nothing. So when I see this alius, I know that the first one is going to mean one, and this one's going to be another. And I don't have to repeat the verb because I know that I am comparing these two guys based on some particular thing. Here, what they have. One has money, the other has nothing. So this is a really common phenomenon. And again, we'll practice it and you'll see how it works. It's pretty clear. We do the same thing in English. The final thing in your chapter is this thing about non nullus. Nullus, remember, means none, and non means no. So not none, actually means some. And so this is a funny way of saying some. Why not just say alius? But that's what they do sometimes. So this is just an alternative. And we also have this pronoun, nemo, which means no one, which has regular forms, nemini and neminem. You can see it is a third declension. But instead of having neminis and nemine, it uses forms of nullus for the genitive. So nullius and nullo. There's no plural for nemo. No one is no one. It's singular. We don't say no ones in English, and neither do the Romans. So that is it. It is, I know, a lot of information in a way, but it is really not complicated information. It's really just forms and getting used to using these correlative forms, which of course we will practice. But do send me your question.